All jury present, seat your own.
All right, was everybody able to get lunch? Yes?
Yes.
And everyone followed my instructions?
Yes.
Excellent. State, call your next witness.
We'll call James Sigler.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sigler. If you can step up to the podium right here. You can turn, raise your right hand, and be sworn by my clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, sir, please have a seat in the witness stand and speak in a loud and clear voice for me. State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Defense counsel? Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
James Sigler.
And Mr. Sigler, do you own the Fisherman Shack in Hudson, Florida?
Yes.
And where is that located roughly?
It's on Old Dixie Highway in Hudson. It's a waterfront tavern.
Okay. What are the hours generally?
10 a.m. till, during the week, it's usually around midnight till 2 in the morning on the weekends.
Okay. Do you have a bunch of regular customers that come there?
Yes, yes.
People you know pretty well and
Yes, yes.
frequent the place? Back before September of 2014, was it normal to see Nicholas Leonard at the Fisherman Shack?
Yes, yes.
Now, I want to talk to you about an employee you had named Megan Brown. Do you remember Megan Brown?
Yes, I do.
Now, when she was hired, did Tanya Carlson actually handle the hiring process in that particular case?
Yes, in that incident she did. Yes.
You were sick at the time or something?
Yes, I was sick and I told her to go ahead with and proceed.
Now, pursuant to that, did you want to meet Megan at 6 o'clock shortly after she had been hired on a particular
Yes,
date?
yes.
And did you arrive for that meeting as she was leaving with somebody you understood to be her
Yes.
boyfriend, Adam Matos?
I was a few minutes late, and as I was walking in, they were walking out. She was walking out.
Okay. And been in the tavern or bar business for a long time?
Yes,
You read people a lot?
yes, yes, I do.
As you were walking by and did the situation,
She was
Hold
very,
on, sir. Oh.
Speculation, same objections before.
Overruled, go ahead.
did the situation between the two of them appear to be tense?
very much so, very much so.
Okay. Now I want to, now in terms of Megan Brown, was she a good employee for you?
Yes,
She show up for all of her shifts up until we get to the August 28th area?
yes,
Never failed to show up without
No,
calling
no,
or anything like that?
very good employee.
And I want to draw your attention to August 28th of 2014, a Thursday. In the morning hours, did you get some communication from Megan Brown on your phone regarding an incident that had occurred that morning?
Yes, she had
Yeah,
texted me.
without telling me what happened, but you did get some communication
Yes,
from her.
yes,
And was she informing you about a situation that happened between her and the father of her child?
yes,
And did you have a couple of back and forth texts and things of that nature in regards to the situation?
not at that time.
Okay.
Not, she had texted me and
You got back to her later in the
I
afternoon?
got back out about an hour or so later.
Okay. Would there come a point during that day where you actually had voice contact with her?
Yes,
Approximately what time, to the best of your knowledge?
I'm thinking between 2 and 4.
In the afternoon?
Yes.
Okay. And without going into what was said, was there discussion about the event that had occurred that morning?
I just to check on her, and I offered her a safe place to get with my wife, and you could take her son and go to my house.
So there was some discussion about
Yes.
about the incident that happened that morning.
Yes.
When she was discussing that incident, what was her demeanor like? Without telling me what was said, how did she sound?
She was very upset.
Was she afraid?
It sounded like it. Sounded like she was scared.
Hold on, sir. There's an objection.
This is,
I don't want to make a statement objection, Judge. Can I
Okay,
approach
Bert. Mr. Sigler, I know you've probably never done this before, but if someone says objection, you have to stop.
Okay.
It's not a problem.
All righty, thank you.
The objection is overruled. If you want to re-ask the question, you may do so.
Yeah, and in that conversation, did Megan Brown appear to be afraid or sound afraid to you based on what you heard?
Yes,
Okay. Now, is that the last time you ever spoke to Megan Brown?
yes, yes it is.
Now, later that afternoon, evening, did you attempt to reach out to her
Yes. she
with the
was-
phone? Did you ever get any responses?
No,
Did you know at that time that she was hanging around with Nicholas Leonard some?
yes,
Did you try and reach out to him
Yes,
to
I
try and
did.
reach Megan?
yes I did.
Were you concerned about her?
Yes, yes,
And did Nicholas Leonard ever respond?
no, neither one of them.
And did Megan Brown have a shift on the Saturday, which would be August 30th of 2014, that she failed to appear for?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, and she didn't call and let you know that she
No.
wasn't coming? She
No.
didn't give you any contact
No,
in advance? Okay. Now, the discussion you had with Megan and the incident she was relaying to you on August 28th, were other people that frequented the Fisherman Shack aware of that through conversation?
yes, I believe Tanya was,
Okay.
yes.
And there was other patrons or regulars that may have heard things about it too because it was a topic of conversation?
I'm not
Or do you
real
know?
sure about that because I wasn't there.
Okay. Now, on August 28th, 2014, were you aware that Megan's vehicle was still at the Fisherman Shack from the night before?
Yes,
And were you aware that it was there still the following day?
Yes.
Friday, August 29th?
yes,
And were you aware that you had some of your employees blocking that vehicle in?
Yes.
So that if anybody
Yes.
came and picked it up, they'd have
yes,
to
we were
come?
concerned and,
You have to
Yeah.
let him finish the question before you
Yeah.
answer. Go ahead.
She's typing everything down, so if you and
Okay.
I speak at the same time,
oh, okay.
she's going to
Okay.
strangle one of us.
It'll probably be him. I'm sure.
And so over the next, the Friday and the Saturday, the employees were keeping an eye on the vehicle.
Yes,
And then on Saturday, that vehicle was gone, as far as you knew.
yes,
Okay. And eventually, September 4th, 2014, you heard about all the stuff that happened up the road on Old Dixie Highway?
Yes.
All the law enforcement?
yes, we did.
And they came and talked to you and some of the
Yes.
employees about
Yes.
the situation? Okay. I don't have any more questions for this witness, Judge.
All right,
No questions from me.
all right. Sir, you may step down.
All right.
Is he released from his subpoena? State,
Yes, Judge.
defense, any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Sir, you are free to go and you're released from your subpoena. Thank you
you.
very much.
Judge,
State,
you
call
just
your-
have one moment, I'm sorry.
With the witness?
No, maybe decision making.
Okay. This is where I play Jeopardy music in my head, but I don't think I can say it out loud. We ready to call our next witness?
We are, Judge, thank you.
State, call your next witness.
Dan Miller.
Dan Miller. Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. If you want to come on up to the podium right here. You can stop, raise your right hand, and be sworn by my clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, sir, please have a seat in the witness stand and speak in a loud and clear voice for me. State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Dan Miller with Napa Auto Parts.
And how long have you worked for Napa in some variation?
20 years now.
And what is your current job with the company?
Currently a store manager.
And in 2014, what was your job?
I was a district loss prevention manager.
And did you have another title as well?
District Operations Manager.
Okay. And could you give us just a brief description of what your job duties entailed back then?
We had 86 stores, anything to do with financial operations, staffing, loss prevention, inventory. I was in charge of all that for the entire district.
And let's go back to October 28th, 2014. Do you recall meeting with a Detective Kugel of the Pasco County Sheriff's Office on that day?
Yes,
And the interaction with Detective Kugel, did he provide you a dollar amount for a transaction?
yes,
And then did he ask you if you could look that up in your system and locate what was purchased and when it was made?
yes,
And is that something you're able to do?
yeah.
So how does your system work for creating those records? Is it automatically done when a transaction occurs and then stored in a computer?
It's automatically done with any transaction. It records a copy of every single invoice.
And then you have the ability to go back into it and search by number of variables, date or dollar amount or credit card number, stuff like that to locate a transaction?
Yes,
And when you do that, are you able to print a copy of the invoice?
yes,
And the dollar amount that Detective Kugel gave you, was it $3.72?
yes,
And did he ask you for a transaction in that amount on August 28th, 2014?
yes,
And were you able to locate that particular transaction?
yes,
And were you able to print out an invoice to give Detective Kugel?
yes, I was.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I've shown defense, and for ID, this is 564. Can you tell me what that document is?
That would be the reprint of the invoice.
And is that a true and accurate copy of the business record that your store created at the time?
Yes,
Now, does your store have cameras, security cameras?
yes,
And were you able to go back to the security cameras and print out some screen captures or screenshots for that same time to document that particular transaction?
yes,
And I'm showing you what has been marked for identification purposes as States 14. Could you tell us what that is?
that is a picture from our surveillance system.
And is that the same copy you provided to Detective Kugel?
Yes, it is.
And is this documenting the transaction that we mentioned earlier, the $3.72?
Correct, it's from the same timestamp as the transaction.
And this is a true and accurate copy of the recording that was created?
Yes,
Your Honor, at this time, we would like to introduce States 14 and States 564 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, 14 and 564 will come in as evidence.
Mr. Miller, in this photograph, there are 3 people visible, 2 of them completely and 1 of them you can only partly see. Do you recognize any of the people on that photo?
I recognize 2 of them, yes.
And which 2 do you recognize?
Bill Lapuznak and Jim Shepard, the store employees.
And the 2 in the blue shirts?
Yes,
And do you know this gentleman?
no,
Okay. And the transaction, the items that were purchased, what were they?
a spark plug and a spark plug gapper.
Would you mind explaining to the jury what a spark plug gapper is?
A spark plug gapper is a small round disc with a ramp on it. So when you have a spark plug, you turn the ramp to adjust the amount of gap for the spark plug so it fires correctly.
Is it roughly a coin-shaped
Yes.
tool? And is this a spark plug gapper?
Yes,
And does that appear to be something that Napa would sell?
that is exactly the brand we sell.
Does that look like the barcode?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I show the jury?
You may. What is it, Mark?
This is in evidence already, it states 302.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one moment. And Mr. Miller, I don't believe it's on here, but just to confirm, does this invoice copy contain the payment information?
Not on a reprint, no, it doesn't.
Okay, thank you. We have no further questions, Judge.
Any cross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Miller, thank you very much, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
Is Stacy released from the subpoena?
He is.
Vince, any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Miller, you can leave and you're released from your subpoena. Thank you very much. Stay, you ready to call your next witness?
We are. State would call Ron Crapsher.
Last name one more time.
Crapsher.
Thank you. Mr. Kratzer, if you want to step up to the podium for me, sir?
Okay.
Stop right there. Raise your right hand and be sworn by my court.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, please have a seat in the witness stand and speak in a loud and clear voice for me, okay?
Yes.
State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Morning.
Good morning.
Afternoon. Yes, afternoon. I just ate lunch. I should get that right. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, my name is Ron Pratzer. I'm a store manager, store number 7466. It's 14217 US Highway 19. It's on Hudson and 19.
And let me ask you to speak a little bit slower just because she's typing everything down.
Okay.
And we don't want to wear her fingers out
Sorry.
quickly. Oh, that's all right. I do it too. I may be the worst offender in the room. So, where are you employed? You just told us, I think.
Walgreens.
Okay. And what do you do for Walgreens?
I'm a store manager.
How long have you worked there?
At that store, I've been there about 4 years.
Okay. Were you employed there in August of 2014?
Yes.
And as a store manager, I assume you have your hands in pretty much all aspects of operations.
Yes, I do.
And does your store have security cameras?
Yes.
And can you give us a basic description of how they operate?
Basically, we have several cameras around the store, and they're all saved on basically a DVR. And at any time we need to look into them, we can bring up any of the cameras
And
from different angles.
And you can search by date and time to locate that.
Date and time, yes.
And then once you've picked the time and the date that you want to look at, do you have the ability to export that as a video?
Yeah, yes, I do, to
Okay.
CD. Yep.
And as far as store transactions, if somebody goes into your store and makes a purchase, is that documented or captured in any way?
Yes, it is in an electronic journal. So you can look up anything by, say, the debit or credit card number or transaction amount.
And once you've looked that up, do you have the ability to print those records out?
Absolutely, yes.
And you call it a journal entry? Is that the
Electronic journal, yes.
electronic journal? Okay.
Yeah, it's just a copy of your receipt, basically.
And do you recall meeting with Pasco County Sheriff's Office and pulling up some surveillance video and also a transaction receipt or an electronic journal entry on
Yep.
the Adam Matos case?
Yes.
And did you provide a copy of the surveillance video for August 28th, 2014 in the 12 o'clock, 12:10 timeframe?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes. It states 566. Can you tell us what this is?
Yes, this is the CD that I made for the officer of the time requested.
And how do you know that's what it is?
Because you showed it to me, and it's of my store.
And did you write on the disc your initials and the date to indicate that this is in fact the CD you viewed?
Yes,
Okay. And that's written on this
it's
disc?
written right there, yes, sir.
And this is a true and accurate copy of the surveillance video footage taken from the Walgreens store on August 28th, 2014.
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time we would like to introduce this into evidence that states 566.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
It'll be introduced as 566.
Thank you. Your Honor, just so you where we are not going to publish at this time.
Okay.
Um,
Ladies, just so they're clear,
Okay.
even though they didn't publish it, it's still in evidence, so you can look at it back there. If they choose to publish it at some other time, they can show it for you.
And did you provide the sheriff's office a printout of the journal receipt for a transaction that they gave you, transaction credit card number they gave you?
Yes,
And they gave you a specific number and you're able to type it into your system and look it up?
correct.
Yes.
Now do it again.
I told you I was the worst offender. The sheriff's office provided you a credit card number and you entered that into your system to locate a transaction.
Correct.
And may I approach the witness again, Judge?
You may.
Is this a copy of the journal receipt that you were able to print?
Yes, it is.
And does that contain part of the credit card number that was provided to you?
Correct.
Would you please read out the portions that are not starred out?
Yes, it is 473702 and then 9616.
And I use the term starred out, I don't know if that's a proper term, but would you explain to the jury what the other numbers are?
It's just the other part of the credit card, and that's just so that I couldn't use your credit card for anything else. It's just for security purposes.
For security purposes, part of the numbers are
Right.
removed when you print it out.
But for an instance, if you need to look something up, like in this case, you just type in the number and it brings up the transaction. This way it gives me a time, which I can then reference to the video.
And what is this purchase for?
These are for Marlboro cigarettes.
And what is the date and time associated with that?
It's 8/28/2014 at 12:07 p.m. Or, no, hold on a second. At 12:09.
And, Your Honor, at this time, we would like to introduce this document into evidence as 567.
I'm sorry.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, it'll come in as 567.
Thank you. And just one last thing, and we'll get you out of here. I'm going to hand you a small stack of photographs. These are labeled as states 568, 576, 575, 574, 573, 572, 571, 570, 569, and 15. Would you look at these and tell us what they are?
They are snapshots off of the CD that I burned for the sheriff's office. And they all have my number right on there, 7466.
When you say your number, you mean the
The store number is on there, so
Okay.
you can clearly see it's my store. Yep.
And these are all true and accurate copies of what appears on the video.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd like to introduce these into evidence. Let me read the numbers of what they would be.
Well, 15 defendants, any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, and the last ones are 568 through what?
568 through 576, I believe is the case.
All right, any objection to 568 through 576?
No, Your Honor.
All right, they'll be so admitted.
Your Honor, I'm just going to publish one at this time.
That's fine.
Mr. Pratcher, on the video stills that are printed out and on the video as well, there appears to be a timestamp along with your store number.
Correct.
And are your timestamps generally accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And just 1 second. We have no further questions, Judge.
All right. Defense, any cross?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Pratcher, you may step down. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
State, may he be released?
You may.
All right. Defense, any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, sir, you're released from your subpoena. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
State, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The state would call Jacqueline Angelo.
Good afternoon, Ms. Angelo. You want to step up to the podium for me? Stop right there. Raise your right hand. Be sworn by my clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. All right, please have a seat in the witness stand and speak in a loud and clear voice for me. Yes. Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am. Could you please turn to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, introduce yourself by stating your name?
My name is Jacqueline Angelo, and the last name is spelled Angelo.
And Miss Angelo, where do you work?
I'm a crime laboratory analyst for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in Tampa, in the biology section.
All right. We've had some analysts testify yesterday from FDLE. You mentioned that you work in the biology section, correct?
That's correct.
Could you just give a brief description of what is done in the biology section?
I examine items of evidence for potential DNA sources, such as blood, semen, saliva, or shed skin cells, epithelial cells. I develop DNA profiles from items of evidence, and I compare them to DNA profiles from known individuals.
Okay. How long have you been doing that?
I've been doing DNA work since the fall of 2011, and I've been working for FDLE since the spring of 2007.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about your educational background that allows you to do this work in DNA. Could you describe for the jury what kind of education you have, undergraduate, and any type of other graduate courses?
I earned a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Florida in Animal Sciences. That included coursework in genetics, biochemistry, molecular biology, and statistics. In addition, I took training at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in forensic serology and DNA.
All right. And outside of that coursework, have you taken coursework specifically related to DNA analysis?
The coursework at FDLE was specific to forensic DNA. In addition, I do continuing education every year since 2011.
All right. And can you describe for this jury what is forensic serology?
Forensic serology is the use of tests to determine potential DNA sources, typically blood, semen, and saliva.
All right. And when we refer to the term forensic DNA, what are we referring to?
That's more specific to the branch of forensics that deals with the development of DNA profiles and the comparisons of DNA profiles.
And through your time with FDLE, I imagine you've performed analysis and in DNA a number of times, correct?
I have analyzed at this point over 5,000 samples since 2011.
And when you do that analytical work, do you prepare reports that outline what you've done?
Yes, I do. Prepare reports for all of my results.
At the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, when you prepare a report, is it given a unique number identifying the case for which you're working on?
Yes, each case, no matter if it came from a police agency or a sheriff's office, is given a unique FDLE number.
In the case that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, was a unique case number given to that case?
Yes, 2014-030-7905.
And if there was evidence that you actually analyzed and looked at, would you place a label on it that would indicate FDLE and the case number for which you just said?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. I'd like to take a second and talk about FDLE as a laboratory, all right? Is there certain qualifications or certifications that the laboratory itself maintains?
The laboratory is accredited by ASCLD Lab, which is short for the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board, which is mercifully shortened to ASCLD Lab. We've been accredited by them since 1990. They are one of the sources of standards for quality forensic work, and we're audited by them.
All right. They ensure that the work that you do as it relates to DNA work is standard with other agencies across the United States.
That's correct.
All right. During the time in which the casework for which you're going to talk about, was the laboratory accredited?
Yes, it is. FDLE has always maintained accreditation since 1990.
Separate from your accreditation, are there certain quality assurance measures that the laboratory may go through to make sure that there is standard quality work that you do?
Specific to the DNA section, the FBI also has separate standards for DNA analysis. In addition to that, FDLE also has developed their own protocols based on scientific procedures and literatures on how to conduct DNA analysis.
Let's just take let's follow the path of a piece of evidence, just a hypothetical piece of evidence, but one similar to a case like this. If a law enforcement agency collects, bags a piece of evidence, and then they want to submit it to you for the purposes of analysis, someone from the agency brings the evidence down to your laboratory in Tampa, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you walk the jury through the process that the evidence would follow as it goes from being brought to the laboratory to you?
So a representative from the agency will submit the evidence into the evidence section. Their evidence technicians will ensure that everything is sealed properly, evidence tape and things like that. Each individual item is also given a unique FDLE number associated with that case. Currently, we use a combination of barcodes and RFID sensors. The evidence technicians place the evidence in the evidence vault that they only have access to. When I'm ready to retrieve evidence, there's an electronic transfer that records the transfer from the evidence technician to myself. Then I place it in my own personal locker.
All right. Is there a limit to how many pieces of evidence that you can request at a particular time?
No.
Okay. If you were going to be performing an analysis, would you request all the evidence, or would you just ask for one piece individually? Let me rephrase that back. Let's step back and maybe we'll get there a different way. As far as the cleanliness of your laboratory, are there certain quality assurance or procedures that you follow to make sure that your laboratory is clean?
Yes. First of all, one piece of evidence is opened at a time. That prevents any interference from one item of evidence to another. I also wear personal protective gear, such as a lab coat, mask, gloves, things like that. In addition, work surfaces and instruments, even pens and pencils, pens, and scissors and other tools are sterilized in between items.
And why do you do all that?
That is to prevent an accidental transfer of DNA, either from myself to the evidence or from one item of evidence to another.
And you mentioned that you only open one piece of evidence at a time. Why is that?
Again, to prevent any sort of transfer from one item of evidence to another.
All right. All right, let's take a moment to step back and talk just about what is DNA, and if you could give the jury a description about what DNA is.
DNA is a molecule found in almost every cell in your body. The big exception is red blood cells. You inherit half from each parent. The purpose of DNA is to basically code for all the life processes that make you a living human being. The bulk of your DNA is consistent between human to human, things like that. There's a small fraction of DNA that varies from person to person. By looking at the areas that vary from person to person, in forensics you can use that to develop a DNA profile and then use that to compare evidence to known samples.
Is DNA different? I get to kind of answer that, but is DNA different from human to human?
That's correct.
And the areas that you look at, how is it that you know to look in those areas?
Well, in forensic DNA, the areas that we look at are called short tandem repeats, or STRs. There are segments of DNA at specific locations. Sometimes they're called areas, loci. They're basically addresses on the DNA. Some of those areas repeat, and the number of times it repeats varies from person to person. If you think of your DNA as a famous book, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The number of times best repeats can vary from person to person. So, to use DNA in forensics, it's easy to look at the lengths of those STR repeating units and measure how long or how short they are. A DNA profile, once it's developed, is just listing that loci or that address, and then listing the number of STR repeating units associated with that area for that particular individual or evidence sample.
These loci and address you talk about, is it a standard place to look for these STR?
There are lots of STR areas located just in human genetics and animal genetics as well. The FBI has basically, among other groups, looked to see what areas show a high variability, because that would be ideal for developing a DNA profile, and areas where we can develop chemistry kits to analyze those areas.
Okay.
So they're common nationwide, basically.
All right. What is PCR and what does that mean?
PCR is the polymerase chain reaction. It's been around since the mid-'80s. And it's basically a way to copy DNA. Specific areas are targeted for DNA replication, and those areas that are targeted have the STR repeating units within them. So in a few hours, we can go and get several million copies of a particular area that we need to look at.
All right. I'd like for you to kind of walk the jury through, if you were given a sample, and let's just say in this case it's blood, what are the steps that you would go through in performing your analysis? If I were to give you a sample, what would you do?
Most of what's going on is taking place inside small sterile tubes, just to give you an idea. But basically, the sample is added to a tube, and the first step is to extract the DNA from the rest of the cellular debris. After that extraction, which is done using chemicals very similar to detergents, basically. After that DNA is extracted and separated out from the cellular material, it goes through PCR so that those copies are made of those targeted areas. After the PCR process, it goes through a separate instrument called a genetic analyzer, which then has a very special camera and laser and gel that can actually measure the length of the DNA. That data is presented on the computer very similar to an EKG chart. So it looks like peaks on a graph. Because STR repeating units are just a number, it's a number of repeating segments, that can easily be converted to something like an Excel spreadsheet that gives the location on the DNA strand and then the number of repeating units.
All right. And when you're in the laboratory, you're handling it and following it down through that entire process. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. When you complete that process, and you mentioned earlier having a known sample and an unknown sample. Can you just describe for this jury what the value of having a known sample is and how that relates to having an unknown sample?
Unknown samples are typically the items of evidence. They're usually of unknown origin. A known sample is a sample of known origin, usually associated with an individual. Most common way is a buccal swab, which is a swab from the inside of the cheek. It's a very good source of DNA. Alternatively, you can also use blood draws and things like that. The importance is because once the DNA profiles are developed, it's important to compare any known profiles to any unknown profiles to see if there's any consistency or matching.
All right. If you have a known profile and then you have an unknown profile that you've developed, are you able to come to some sort of relationship between the two as it relates to statistics?
Yes, statistics are important in forensic DNA because once a match between an evidence sample and a question sample and a known sample occurs, the next question is how significant is that match? If you think about something like blood typing, if you find out that an evidence sample is O positive and so is a suspect, for example, that's not very unique. There's a very large amount of the population that has O positive blood. Because there are so many STR areas to look at and each one has so many repeating units, it's easy to calculate how rare or how common a particular repeating unit is. So statistics can be used to show how rare and unique the entire profile is overall.
All right. And I imagine you have specific casework as it relates to statistics?
Yes, I did take statistics in undergrad, and in addition to that, at FDLE, one of the training modules concerns statistics, reading scientific literature on how to do basically genotype frequencies and things like that.
All right. Ultimately, and again, we're talking right now just hypothetically about a known sample and an unknown sample. If you were to determine that they match, you would be able to provide some statistical evaluation of that match, correct?
That's correct.
To do that, you kind of outlined that you have to have a background in statistics, but there's also a whole bunch of other stuff related to the population as a whole, and the databases related to that, correct?
That's correct. Obviously, I need a source to find out how rare and unique a particular STR repeating unit is. For example, at Tho, I know I'm a 1.3 or a 9.3, which is in about 30% of the Caucasian population. The source for a population database actually comes from the Journal of Forensic Science. It was a population database published in 2003, and they examined several hundred individuals, developed their DNA profiles, and then just looked to see how common or rare certain STR repeats were.
Is that the database that you use for the FDLE?
Yes, for this case.
Okay. And where were the samples collected from that are using that database?
We have several databases. I believe this one involved blood bank donations.
Okay.
And I believe there were other sources, but I cannot remember at this time.
Do you know how is the samples that are collected to use in a database? Do you know the number of samples that were collected for that?
Roughly 600, about 200 from Caucasian, African American, and Hispanic populations.
All right, and is that representative of a population? Those numbers?
Yes.
All right, and if someone were to provide a sample, like you said, and they were to say that they were African American, how is that racial background identified?
I believe for this database, I know self-declared was one of it. I think also there could have just been some note-taking by the person drawing the blood. And the reason for that is within populations, there can be a small difference between frequency representation.
Okay. The database input which you use at FDLE, is that a published database?
Yes, it was published in 2003 in the Journal of Forensic Science.
And when it's published in the Journal of Forensic Science, is it subject to peer review?
Yes, it is.
And has that been done?
Yes.
Okay. When you're performing your statistical analysis, how is it determined that a particular database is suitable for statistical analysis?
There are several out there, and really the goal is just, does it have a large enough sample size, which this one does, to represent the population? That's really about it.
As it relates to, if I were to ask you with the term, what the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is, what does that mean and how does that relate to the database?
Basically, that's part of population genetics that allows us to use a formula at each loci to determine the genotype frequency. It requires all of those STR loci to be independently inherited from your parents to the children. That happens. It also requires a random assortment with mating. Humans do not mate randomly. However, in this case with STR repeats, that's a silent trait that's not manifested physically. So with regards to STR typing, we can apply Hardy-Weinberg to that.
Okay.
It's basically the math formula that allows us to determine the frequencies.
And you're familiar with the formulas and you know how to use them?
Yes.
All right. What is linkage equilibrium?
Kind of what I was mentioning, how loci, basically STRs are inherited independently. When cellular division happens, your DNA packs itself into chromosomes, and that's how it sorts around the cell. Well, if you have two areas on the same chromosome that can be inherited together because they're sort of piggybacking on each other. So ideally, with linkage equilibrium, you want to make sure that your STR markers are located far away enough that that doesn't happen. So again, you can still apply the math rules involved. That's one reason why, even though there's hundreds of STR areas that we could look at, we don't look at all of them because some of them are too close to each other.
Okay. And my last question about the database and the statistics, could you explain to the jury what the product rule is and how that relates?
The product rule is basically the math used to combine all the frequencies. And it's actually easy to understand even without a genetic background. If I flip a penny, the chances of it going on heads is 50%. The chances of me throwing a penny and then a penny again and getting heads twice is 25%, because that's 50% times 50%. Because STR repeating units are inherited independently, it's really like throwing a bunch of pennies and counting how many had heads. So each of the frequencies can just be multiplied to each other.
All right. Let's now move to what you actually did in this case. All right. We talked about the unique FDLE case number that is associated with your reports. As part of your analysis, were you given a number of different submissions to perform analysis on?
Yes, I was. There was multiple submissions.
All right. And when you would prepare a report based on the submission, each report would have a date. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So for the purposes of our testimony today, I'm going to refer to some of your report by date, okay?
Perfect.
All
May I
right.
refer to my notes when this is going on?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
All right. You mentioned that there were some standards that you would need as part of your analysis, correct?
That's correct.
Let's start there. Did you receive some standards for the purposes of developing a profile?
Yes, I did.
All right. And just so the jury's clear, the analysis you do is in your laboratory in Tampa, correct?
That's correct.
Do you ever go to a crime scene, or did you go to the crime scene involved in this case?
I never go to crime scenes.
Got it. So if you were to receive a piece of evidence, it has the number in which, or the identification marker that the collecting agency, in this case the sheriff's office, would have on it? Yes?
Yes.
And then it would also have a description based on where they collected it, correct?
Yes, there's usually some sort of description to give an idea of what the item is.
All right. I'd like to start talking about the standards that were given to you in reference to a buccal swab from Adam Matos. Okay? And this we're referring to your report dated 10/21/14.
Yes, I have the report now.
Okay. Being provided a buccal swab, being referenced as being from Adam Matos, were you able to develop a profile related to that buccal swab?
Yes, I was able to develop a complete profile.
All right. And what do you mean by complete profile?
This particular DNA chemistry kit, which is called Identifier Plus, looks at 15 STR areas. A complete profile means that information was found at all 15 areas. If it was less than 15 areas, that would be considered a partial profile, but this one is complete.
Okay. Were you provided a sample which was noted as SM2 and identified as being rib and muscle tissue from Nicholas Leonard?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to perform some analysis on that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And were you able to develop a profile based on that sample?
Yes, that was a partial profile.
Okay. And as you just explained, it's not at all 15 loci that you were looking for.
That's correct.
All right. Were you provided a standard from the person of Megan Brown, which was also identified as SM9?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Were you able to develop initially, were you able to develop a profile from the sample of Megan Brown?
Not the first time. I made a second attempt.
Okay. And when you made a second attempt, were you able to develop a profile?
Yes.
Was it a complete or partial profile? If I ask you to refer to your report 12/4/14. Yeah. And I guess the reason I'm asking you to refer to specific dates is because you did a number of reports in this case, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Hers is also a partial profile.
Okay. And were you able to develop a profile from a sample that was given to you represented as SM14, the rib and muscle tissue of Margaret Brown?
I have that listed as SM15.
That's what, yeah, SM15. Forgive me if I said something different.
Yes, that was a complete profile.
Okay. And were you able to develop a profile from a sample identified as SM17, rib and muscle tissue from Greg Brown?
Yes, I was able to develop a partial profile from that one.
Okay. So in this case, those were the standards that you would have for the purpose of comparison. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Since you have partial profiles as to Megan Brown and Greg Brown, how does that affect your ability to do comparisons? Does it have a significant impact?
Not a significant impact. Anytime a standard has a partial profile, when it is compared to an evidence sample, a match can still be declared. That's not a problem. When it comes to the statistics, I do not include any math for the areas where no comparison could be made because it was a partial profile. So if at one particular area the sample didn't produce any results, no math would be applied to that area.
All right. Since we're talking about the actual persons and the samples that were collected from them, let's talk about samples that were collected from the person of Adam Matos, okay? And I want to refer to your report 1021 of 14, where you provided a number of samples that were represented as coming from the person of Adam Matos.
Yes.
All right. I'll refer to them as, we'll do 4DW, which was represented as being from the right toenail clippings of Adam Matos, and 5DW, the left toenail clippings of Adam Matos. Were you able to analyze those and determine if there was a profile?
I'm sorry, did you say 4DW and 5DW?
I said 4DW and 5DW.
I did develop some DNA profiles from that.
Okay, and what can you tell the DNA about the profiles that you were able to develop?
For the right toenails, a complete DNA profile was obtained, but there was nothing foreign to Adam Matos on the sample.
What does that mean when you say there's no foreign profile in a sample?
In general, when an item comes from an individual and there's additional DNA that's not consistent with that individual, that's typically called a foreign DNA profile. So in this case, everything in the results was consistent with the person that the sample came from.
Okay. And that is for both the right and left toenails, correct?
With the left toenails, there was some very low-level data that was present, but it wasn't suitable for comparison.
Okay. And what does that mean?
DNA results can sometimes be like a speaker where you can hear music, and if there's not a lot of original sample, it's like having the volume very, very low. You can tell there's music playing, but you really can't make out a specific song. So in this case, there was some low-level data, but it wasn't anything to make a comparison to.
Okay. And now I'd like to ask you about a sample that was provided to you identified as 8DW, fingernail scrapings from Adam Matos.
I developed partial DNA profiles from those, and nothing foreign to Adam Matos were found on their scrapings.
Okay. And now I'd like to refer you to the samples that were submitted to you as being from the persons of Margaret Brown, and this was referenced in a report you created dated April the 23rd of 2015.
Okay.
All right. Were you presented with two samples or two items, one being identified as SM34, fingernail cuttings from Margaret Brown, her right hand, and then SM35, fingernail cuttings from Margaret Brown's left hand. Were you able to develop a profile as it relates to that?
I was able to develop DNA profiles from those samples, but nothing foreign to Margaret Brown were found on those samples.
Okay. Were you able to find her DNA, just nothing foreign to her DNA, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Let me also ask you about some samples in that same report that were submitted to you as being identified as being collected from Nicholas Leonard. These are samples that would have come from his hands or his fingernail clippings, okay? I'm going to ask you to look at samples that were given to you SM22, SM227, SM21, and SM228. And these are fingernail clippings from his left and his right hands. What can you tell us about your analysis on those?
The DNA results foreign to Nicholas Leonard were very limited in nature, and no comparisons could be made. The data was not interpretable.
All right. what do you mean when you say that is not interpretable? What does that mean?
Going back to the speaker metaphor, the sample can just have such low results that it has no comparison value. It's just low-level data where if you're given a standard from an individual, you can't say the person is included or even excluded in that sample.
Let's take a second to talk about the effect that decomposition can have on DNA. All right? In this case, there's been some testimony about both bodies being subject to moderate to advanced decomposition. How can decomposition affect a sample for the purposes of DNA collection?
With DNA is a long molecule that will break down once it's exposed to heat or moisture. It's a very long protein, and once it starts to break, it becomes more and more difficult to develop a DNA profile.
All right, you mentioned that heat and moisture can affect a DNA molecule?
Yes.
All right. Okay. I'd like now to talk about some samples that were presented to you that came from the residence at 7719 Hatteras. And in doing so, I'm going to ask, again, I'm going to follow the same procedure and follow, but I'm also going to ask that we're going to put photographs that have already been admitted into evidence that correspond with some of the samples that you were collected, okay?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to start with some samples that were collected from the east garage of this residence, and I'm referring to 456. While he pulls that out, were you presented with a sample being identified, and this is from your report 1016-15, being a sample from NS18, swabs from the garage floor, pin 5. All right. Can everyone in the jury see if we keep the monitor here? Is that okay? All right.
Can you see your stuff if I turn down what's in the light?
Absolutely.
So we're the east garage, NS
18.
10-5, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, sorry. These one's right over the.
Oh, here we go. All right, NS18, pin 5, you said?
Yes, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. So and we're going to stay with this report for a few minutes. Okay. Were you able to develop a profile as it relates to swabs that came from this area?
The DNA results were limited and not interpretable.
Okay. Same. The term non-interpretable, you kind of gave us an excellent metaphor as explaining that. That's going to be consistent if we refer to that throughout the case?
That's correct.
Okay. I'd now like to refer to States 450. I'd like to ask you about the NS9 abandoned from NS9 blanket. Were you able to develop a profile from NS9?
Yes, I developed a complete profile that matched Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. And since this is the first time we're talking about a match to a known sample, were you able to provide us with some sort of statistical relevance to that match?
Yes, I was able to do math for 14 loci, which again, this kit looks at 15 loci. I would expect to see this profile once in 6.9 billion individuals.
Okay, let's talk about that number. You would expect to see the frequency of this profile in 6.9 billion, you said?
One individual in a room of 6.9 billion, basically.
Okay. If you could get a room that big,
That's correct.
and fit 6.9 people in it, you'd only find one person.
Right.
Okay.
A room of non-relatives, but still.
All right. All right, ma'am. Let's talk about a swab that came from a pillow and a pillowcase in S12, and I'm referring to states 447. 447. 447. Oops. Sorry. And were you able to develop a profile from a pillow and a pillowcase?
The profile from the pillow was a mixture of at least 2 individuals. One person was donating much more DNA than the other, or others, and that's considered the major profile. The profile from Nicholas Leonard is consistent with that major profile.
The term mixture, I mean, it kind of indicates what it is, but what does a mixture mean in the world of DNA analysis?
That's a DNA sample that has more than one individual donating DNA. On a single source sample or a standard, data is usually presented as 2 STR repeating units because you inherit 1 from each parent. When you start seeing 3 or 4 or 7 peaks, it's an indication that more than one person is donating DNA. When you have a mixture, one thing you can do is to see if one person is contributing more DNA than the rest. Mathematically, if the person is donating about 3 times more DNA than the other people, mathematically we can separate that person out and call them the major contributor. Going back to the speaker metaphor, if you had 2 speakers, one playing rock and one playing country, if one is turned up louder than the other, you probably can make out the louder one.
Okay. So again, this pillow and pillowcase that came from NS12 was a mixture, including Nicholas Leonard.
The pillow was a mixture. The pillowcase was single source, a complete profile, consistent with the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Same statistical relevancy?
6.9 billion, yes.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Yeah, that's it. Sure. I'm going to display what States Exhibit 448 as items that came from NS 21. Okay. All right. I'd now like to talk about a blanket that was presented to you from being identified as NS 21. And this is 446, if you can find 446. Were you able to develop a profile related to NS 21, a blanket pin 7?
Sure you don't want 444?
Maybe it's 444. Maybe I messed up mine. Coming from pin number 7.
Is it 444?
What is this? 444.
But this is pin 7, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I worked 2 samples from this, stain 1 and stain 2. Stain 2 is a complete profile. That profile matches the DNA profile from Greg Brown. The first stain was very limited. There was enough data that I could look at it and exclude some individuals, but I couldn't include them. I could not include or exclude Greg Brown. Adam Matos, Nicholas Leonard, Megan Brown, and Margaret Brown are excluded. This is a little more data than some of the non-interpretable limited results, but not enough to include somebody in a mixture.
Okay. Were you able to give us any type of statistical relevancy as to the profile of Gregory Brown?
Yes, for this result, if the number is over 700 billion, instead of listing the specific stat, it really is just over 1 in 700 billion. I do have the specific number if you want it.
No, but I guess the number is so high that it's not
That number was chosen as a cutoff for report writing because the Earth's population is 7 billion, so this is 100 times larger than the Earth's population.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
And now I'd like to move to a sample that was provided to you, identified as NS39, swabs from garage G2B. And this is stage 455. Ma'am, were you able to develop a profile from that?
This sample was a mixture of at least 2 individuals. It was too complex to interpret further.
Okay. And what would cause something to be too complex?
If the data makes it difficult to determine how many contributors or how much DNA each person is contributing, that will often lead to a complex mixture that just can't be interpreted further.
So if there's too many sources?
That's one reason it will be too complex, yes.
Okay. Is there a specific number that can be too many?
Not necessarily, even with 3 or 4, sometimes if one person is just contributing so much more, that person can still be considered a major donor.
Okay. All right, ma'am, I'd like to reference a sample that was given to you as identified as NS28, identified as a drywall sheet from garage, and I believe there were some samples that came from that. Were you able to, do you know what I'm referencing?
JM28?
NS28. This is from a report, that's from a different report, ma'am. It's dated 10/21/14.
NS28 drywall sheet from garage?
Yes, ma'am. Were you able to develop a profile from that?
Yes, I took 3 samples, samples A, B, and C. Complete profiles were developed that matched the DNA profile from Margaret Brown.
And again, is this one of those ones that the frequency was so high, you just say complete profile?
This one wasn't as high, 1 in 17 quadrillion.
Okay. How many zeros are after a quadrillion?
Well, we all, I think, know what a million is. If you add 3 zeros, that's billion, trillion, quadrillion.
Okay, so still a fairly statistically relevant number. Not that many people on Earth, I guess.
Well, no, yes, it's higher. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. All right, ma'am. Okay. You will also submitted some samples from a vehicle, and I'm speaking specifically about a sample, and this was testified to by a forensic tech. The sample would have been SJG38, referenced in your report, 10/16/2015.
All right, I have report 10/16/2015 out. What was the item number?
SJG38. For the record, I'm going to reference State's Exhibit 502. Ma'am, were you able to develop a profile as it relates to a sample taken at SJG38?
Swabs from V38.
SJG38, swabs from V38, yes ma'am.
Okay. No DNA results were obtained from that sample.
And what does that mean when you say no DNA?
At that point, no STR repeating units were visible in the data.
Okay. And now I'd like to talk about some items that were collected and presented to you from the West Garage. And so this is all in reference to beginning with a report that was dated 10/21/14. And the items I'm asking you about were item SM62, apparent projectile recovered from trash bag pin 14.
All right, I'm at 10/21/14. What was the exhibit number again?
Yes,
please?
ma'am. SM62 was identified as an apparent projectile recovered from a trash bag located at pin 14. And for the record, we're referring to State's Exhibit 357.
A complete profile was obtained from this sample. The profile matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
All right, and just so we're clear, the photograph just shows pin 14, and that's not for your reference, but the item that you tested was a projectile that was recovered from the trash bag at pin 14. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Staying in this area, did you have an opportunity to test a swab or an item that came from SM63, apparent footprint in garage 5?
Yes, no results were obtained from that sample.
Okay. And how about SM64, apparent footprint in garage pin 6?
The limited DNA results obtained were too limited to interpret.
All right. And too limited to interpret, is that different than not interpretable?
No, it's the same.
Okay. I'd now like to focus your attention on a sample that you have been provided as SM83, a DVD case. And we're referencing State's Exhibit 342.
Which report?
I'm sorry, ma'am, we did change reports to 10/16/2015.
SM83A?
Yes, ma'am?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a profile from a swab coming from a DVD case from bag 11?
Yes, that profile was a complete profile consistent with the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. Let me ask you about a sample that was provided to you, SM85. I'm going to reference State's Exhibits 343 and 344. This is SM85, a mattress top from bag at pin 12.
I looked at 2 stains on SM83.
Okay.
For stain 1, a complete profile was obtained. It's consistent with Nicholas Leonard. For stain 2, the profile was also consistent with Nicholas Leonard. There was some low-level additional data that was too low-level to interpret.
Okay. Were you able to give some sort of statistical relevancy as to the stains at stain 1 or stain 2?
Both of them are the same. It's 1 in 6.9 billion again.
Okay. I'd now like to reference a swab that you may have analyzed, SM101, swabs from sheet from bag pin 13.
A complete profile was developed that matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. I'd also like to reference the next one is identified as SM107, a sock from bag at pin 14. State's Exhibits 366 or 401. Were you able to develop a profile from SM107, sock from bag at pin 14? I'm sorry, Did I say that wrong? No, I didn't.
No, I'm just making sure that I'm clear.
Okay.
There were 2 samples tested. One was a stain and one was just a general wear area of the sock. The wear area of the sock, the results were not interpretable due to being limited and low level. The stain was the complete profile. It matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. All right, I'd now like to reference a swab that may have been given to you in reference to SM-146, identified as a swab from garage CC. This would be states 377 or 379.
A complete DNA profile was obtained, and it matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
And same with a sample from SM-147, swabs from garage DD. Were you able to develop a profile as it relates to that? And this would be States Exhibit 377 or 381.
Yes, a complete profile was obtained that matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
All right. I'd like to reference a number of swabs that were given to you in reference to SM-137, okay? Where you submitted a number of swabs in reference to SM-137.
Yes, and several of them were sort of sub-exhibit with letters,
Okay.
B, C, D, things like that.
I'd like to display, if we could, States Exhibits, let's see, 317, 318. Okay. I suggest to you that SM-137 is these plastic containers. You were submitted a number of swabs related to that, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So I'd like to expedite it, since there were a number of them, just kind of talk about them individually. You analyzed a number of swabs related to SM-137.
That's correct.
All right. As to the swabs that you analyzed, were you able to develop a profile related to this case?
Yes.
And I know there's one that did not, so what that would be swabs from I. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other ones, were you able to develop a profile as to the swabs related to 137?
Yes, all the other profiles were consistent with Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. There was one swab related to SM-137, Pen 8, that did not have any results. Is that correct? And it's talking about swab from SM-137I, swabs from I.
Yes, this one also failed to give chemical indication for blood as well.
And what does that mean?
The area didn't give chemical indication for blood.
So not blood.
Not at that point.
Okay. All right. I'd now like, did you receive swabs from SM-141, identifying as swabs from X? And this would be states 334 or 335.
Yes, this was a complete profile consistent with the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
All right. All right. Staying in the West Garage, I'd like to reference, did you receive swabs from SM-65A, swabs being from Garage JJ?
Yes.
Just hold on. Were you able to develop a profile from the swab collected from JJ?
Yes, it was a complete profile that matched the profile from Margaret Brown.
Were you able to develop a swab from a sample given to you as SM151, identified as swabs from garage HH?
Yes, that was a complete profile that matched the profile from Margaret Brown.
Were you able to develop a profile from SM143, swabs from garage swab Z? This would be reference to States Exhibit 372.
Yes, the complete profile was obtained and it matched the profile from Margaret Brown.
Were you able to give, these being complete profiles, was there any statistical, or is this one of those?
It was over 700 billion.
Okay. All right, and let's just, in reference to States Exhibit 372. All right, well, we'll come back to that in a minute. But that was a swab from Z, correct?
That's correct.
All right, let's move to a different, stay with the same report, 10/16/2015, but I'd like to now reference a swab that was provided to you, JM21, and it was represented as swabs from B1A. This is States 169. Were you able to develop a profile from swabs from B1A, JM21?
That was a complete profile that matched the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. This is States 169. Okay.
You give me the SN, JG, whatever the,
Yes, ma'am. JM21.
thank you, sorry about that.
Now I'd like you to ask a question. Did you receive a sample from JM24 identified as swabs from B1D, reference States 170?
That was a complete profile that matched the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
And now, did you receive a sample from JM28 identified as swabs from B1H? And we're talking about States 174.
The complete profile matched the profile from Nicholas Leonard. There was also some low-level additional data that wasn't interpretable.
Did you receive swabs from JM30 identified as swabs from B1J? This is States reference 178, 179.
This was a complete profile that matched the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. All right. Going to stay with the same report, 10/16/2015. Did you receive swabs from MC14 identified as swabs from floor of room G, reference States 264? Were you able to develop a profile related to States 264?
This was a mixture of at least two individuals. One was contributing more DNA and could be considered a major profile. That major profile matches the profile from Megan Brown. The additional contributor is too low level to interpret.
Just one moment. We're talking about Page 264. Here, remember, Your Honor.
You may. Matter of fact, the jury might want to take a break and just
Okay.
to use the restroom. So, we've been going for more than an hour and a half, so, and after lunch. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have you take your afternoon break. It'll be a 15-minute break, so you can step downstairs and get coffee if you want. You can leave your jury pages there, your notes. We'll give you your phone. Remind you no tweeting, texting, blogging, or anything like that.
All jurors present to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, everybody able to stretch your legs and walk around? It's nice outside. I walked out there. I'm like, look, sun shining, nice. Wow. State, you ready to proceed?
I am, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, Ms. Angelo, in my exuberance to discuss some DNA, I kind of overlooked some things, and I'd like to take a minute to go back to some items we already spoke about, okay?
Have us us all.
All right, yep. I'd like to reference State's Exhibits 318 and 325. And these are in reference to SM 137, okay? And I'm referring to your report 10/16/2015.
Yes.
And just so that the record is clear, there were a number of swabs taken from these items. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And what I'd like to do is I'm just going to identify the swabs and at the end ask you whether or not you were able to make a profile with each swab. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you about swabs from L, swabs from M, swabs from J, swabs from N, swabs from O, swabs from P, swabs from R, swabs from S, swabs from T, swabs from K, and swabs from Q, all coming from SM 137. Those are all individual swabs upon which you tested?
That's correct.
And you were able to develop a profile as it relates to each of those swabs identified.
That's correct.
And what was the result of your analysis as to those swabs?
Those profiles match the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. I'd like to stay in that same report, 10/16 of 15, and move to SM 143. Swabs from garage, labeled Z, and in reference to states 371 and 373. Again, just it's SM 143.
SM 143Z was a complete profile that matched Margaret Brown.
All right, ma'am. We talked about a swab that was, or a DVD swab that was given to you, or a DVD case labeled as SM 83A, correct? And this is that same report.
That's correct.
Okay, I'd like to show you what's been introduced as State's Exhibit 397.
Do I need the gloves for this?
Well,
I recognize the outer package from the FDLE sticker as well as the date and my initials. I also see my own seal that I placed on it back in November of 2015.
Did you remove the items from the bag? Okay. Is that an item that you tested?
Yes, and I recognize it from my initials and the date on the back.
Is there a reference to where you may have taken the swab from?
There's a sticker here.
Okay. Is that an item for which you would have tested?
Yes, I tested it for the chemical indication of blood, and I collected a sample physically from it.
And the sample that you collected from this item, were you able to test it and develop a profile?
Yes, I developed a complete profile that matched the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
And I'd like to show you one more physical piece of evidence that was been admitted as State's Exhibit 401.
Thank you. I also recognize this from the FDLE sticker as well as my initials and the date, and I see my evidence seals on it.
Okay, could you, and this is an item SM107 represented as being a sock from bag at pin 14.
Yes.
Could you remove the item from that? Okay. All right, and did you take, you mentioned that there were some stains and samples that you collected from that, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in doing so, do you have to actually cut the item of clothing?
Yes, I do.
All right. And you indicated that you tested the stain on that item, is that correct?
That's correct.
And were you able to determine, I guess, a serology as it relates to that item?
From the stain, it was a complete profile that matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. All right, ma'am, still referencing your report of 10/16/2015, I'd like to ask you about a sample that was collected from NS65, identified as plywood from the floor of bedroom A, B1C. This is States 163. 164, forgive me.
Is this NS 64 or 65?
65.
Okay. That's from room A?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Were you able to, that's a little too blurred. Okay. Were you able to develop a profile from the swabbings that was taken from this sample?
A complete profile was obtained, and it matches the DNA profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Were you able to do serology as it relates to this?
Yes, it gave chemical indication for blood.
And I would like also to reference a sample that you may have collected or analyzed from JM32, referencing states 180 and 181.
JM32, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Were you able to develop a profile related to JM32?
A complete profile was obtained that matches the profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. All right, ma'am. I'd now like to ask you some questions about a different room, but still referencing your report as of October the 16th, 2015. Reference to states 264, swabs from MC14 being identified from swabs from floor of room G.
MC14?
MC14.
This profile had a mixture of at least 2 individuals. A major profile could be obtained, and that profile matches the profile from Megan Brown. The additional contributor or contributors is too low level to interpret.
I'd now like to reference a sample that you tested from JM40, being identified as swabs from MBRA. Reference states 202, 203. Ma'am, were you able to test this sample?
The profile was a mixture of at least 2 individuals. There was a major contributor. That major contributor matches the DNA profile from Megan Brown. The additional contributor or contributors was too low level to interpret.
Were you provided a sample from JM41, represented as swabs from MBRE, reference to states 198, 199. Were you able to develop a profile related to the swabs from this stain?
This was a complete profile that matched the profile from Megan Brown.
Again, were you provided a sample from JM42, identified as swabs from MBRF, reference to states 200 and 201?
This was a complete DNA profile that matched the profile from Megan Brown.
Were you also provided a swab from JM43, identified as swabs from MBCA? Reference states 205, 206?
Yes, this was a complete DNA profile that matched the DNA profile from Nicholas Leonard.
Okay. Were you also provided either the actual item of NS64, identified as plywood from closet of room G? Reference states 215?
Yes, I received the plywood itself and collected a sample from this exhibit to do DNA on it. The complete DNA profile obtained matches Greg Brown.
All right, now I'd now like to ask you about a number of items that were submitted to you for the purposes of examination. Did you receive a shovel in this case that was identified as SJG30, and this is in reference to your report 10/21/14? Well, maybe it's, let me double check that date. Yes. On page 4 or 5.
Not from the October 16th report.
October 21st, 2014. if I referenced it as October the 21st, 2014, an item was submitted by the identification of SJG30, a shovel.
Yes. Finally,
Okay.
I found it.
Okay.
Due to the limited nature of the DNA results, it was too low level to interpret.
Okay. As it relates to the shovel that you tested, did you collect samples from multiple areas on the shovel?
I did. I labeled them A, B, C, D, and E. C and E had some low-level data that was too low level to interpret. A, B, and D had no DNA results.
Okay, and where were these on the shovel? Now let's just take a minute to look at an item that's already been introduced. That's State's Exhibit 503.
Okay.
As it relates to State's Exhibit 503, do you see the unique FDLE case number?
Yes.
Okay,
And my initials and the date.
okay, I'm going to show you what's been in. So I introduce the State's Exhibit 503. Can you point or tell me where to rotate and I will.
I took these over the course of 2 days. Swab A is near the handle. Swab B is the blade. Swab C is on the shovel shaft, a third mark, basically if you cut it into thirds, a third closer to the blade end. D is the third of the shaft that's pretty much in the middle. E is a third of the shaft closest to the handle.
Okay. And again, were you able to develop a profile related to this?
No, I wasn't. The results were too low level to interpret.
Let me just ask you a question about that now. An item such as this generally has to be carried or moved. How is it that you can have an item that someone would touch or hold and not have a DNA left in an item like this?
Are you asking about touch DNA?
I'm just asking, yes, ma'am.
Touch DNA is any DNA left from your hands after touching an object, and there are several factors involved on whether or not a decent DNA profile can be developed. One is just how much DNA the individual is shedding. Sometimes just everybody's, depending on what's going on with your hands and stuff like that, you might be shedding a lot, you might be shedding a little bit. Dry hands versus moist hands, things like that. The surface of the item also makes a difference. A smooth surface like this table doesn't leave a lot of opportunity to shed cells. So you actually don't leave a lot of DNA touching a smooth surface. A rough surface is a little different. It's a little abrasive and it'll catch some of the DNA from your hands. So there's a lot of variables involved, and that's also just not a high area to donate DNA.
Could things like environmental conditions, like water or humidity, could that affect touch DNA?
Yes, heat and moisture can degrade DNA.
And this may sound like a silly question, but can cleaning supplies or cleaning equipment, can that affect DNA?
Yes, I use cleaning supplies to sterilize my surface areas in between items of evidence, for example.
And how about bleach? Could bleach affect DNA?
Bleach is a cleaning agent, yes.
All right. And if something is wiped or cleaned, that clearly that can also affect DNA.
That's correct, yes.
All right. You were also submitted an item that was identified as, and this is reference to that same report, 10/21/14, as RC32, a Caltech firearm. And this is reference to State's Exhibit, Brian?
53.
53. You submitted this item for the purposes of DNA analysis.
Yes, I collected a sample from it. I did not obtain any DNA results from this sample.
Okay. I guess we could add to the list, if an item is found in water, could water, something being submerged in water for a period of time, could that affect DNA?
Yes, it can.
All right. Along those same lines, where you also submitted an item identified as JM1A, and this is in reference to a different report, December the 4th, 2014. And this is in reference to States 57. Brian? Thank you.
I collected a sample from this hammer. The DNA results were too limited to interpret.
Reference to that same report, we also submitted some knives identified as JM2A and JM3A. This is in reference to States Exhibits 222, 223, and 224.
224 and 222.
222. And were you able to develop profiles off of these items?
I collected samples from the knives, one sample from JM2A and two samples from JM3A. I didn't obtain any DNA results from those samples.
Okay. And one final item, again, back to your report of 10/21/14. And this is in reference to an item identified as SM61 black tape in reference to States 276. Were you able to develop a sample from this item?
I collected a sample from SM61. I did not obtain any DNA results from that sample.
All right, ma'am, I'd now like to ask you about a series of samples that were sent to you in reference to a report dated 4/23/25. The following samples that we're going to discuss were testified to by a forensic tech. Let me know when you're...
All right, I'm on that report.
Okay. Well, you submitted a sample from 52 DW. Known as a steering wheel cover from Blue Truck.
Yes, that was a mixture of at least two individuals. It was too low level to include anybody, but there was enough information to exclude. No determination could be made to Nicholas Leonard in that mixture. Megan Brown, Margaret Brown, Greg Brown, and Adam Matos are excluded from that mixture.
Were you also provided a sample from 54 DW, swabs from the driver's side interior door handle?
Yes, I was. No DNA results were obtained.
Okay. And as well from a swab from 66 DW, swab from gear shift lever.
No DNA results were obtained from that sample as well.
Okay. And 80 DW, swabs from glove, botch, box, latch. Easy for me to say.
No DNA results were obtained from that sample either.
Talk about a item that's being represented from a gear shift lever in a car, and this is an item that if someone's driving the car, they would touch with great regularity. How is it that you think you would have a no result for DNA on an item like that?
Touch DNA doesn't donate a lot of samples. I actually remember in training, I swabbed my own car and didn't get very high samples. It's a very smooth surface, and it's not like something you hold that has a really rough abrasive edge.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. All right. All right, I'd now like to talk about a series of items that you reference in your report, 12/4/2014, and these would be items collected reference to SM 37, reference to states 287, 288, represented as being a white plastic bag. Were you able to develop a profile related to this item?
December 4, 2014 report, but what was the exhibit number again?
Yes, ma'am. SM 37, white plastic bag.
The DNA results from that sample were too limited to interpret.
Okay. In that same report, SM 28, reference to states 280 to 283, represent as being a yellow rope found with Nicholas Leonard.
No DNA results were obtained from that sample.
Okay. And then SM 38, brown electric cord found with Margaret Brown. Were you able to develop a profile related to that? And this is reference to states 286.
No DNA profile was obtained from that sample.
And finally, SM 40, black cable ties found with Margaret Brown, reference to states 285.
No DNA results were obtained from that sample.
All right. Okay. I'd like to reference, unfortunately, I don't know if an item SM 99A, and let me just find what report that was referenced in. If you find it first, let me know.
That would be laboratory report April 23rd, 2015.
Yes. SM99A was represented as being a Colonial Electric shirt. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you test it for serology?
Yes, I did.
And were you able to determine if there was any blood on that item?
It tested negative for blood.
Did you perform any further analysis on that item?
No, I did not.
Okay. Ma'am, let me ask you a question about a number of the items that we talked about that were tested and there was no DNA results, okay? Some of those items were represented as coming from an actual person. The fact that there's no DNA on a particular item doesn't mean that someone didn't touch or have that item, is that correct?
That's correct.
It just means that there was, what does that mean then?
Many of these samples I did do some basic serology testing on. It's not unusual for heat or moisture to degrade a DNA sample to the point that STR repeats can't be obtained.
Okay, all right. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Right?
Thank you, Ms. Angelo. I have no further questions at this time.
Can we give all the evidence back?
Judge, just one moment, yes. Just keeping it stacked.
No, they said they did, we'll get that. Ben, Cross?
I just have a question, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Just to make sure I heard right, with regard to Exhibit SM62, pin 14, I think it was a projectile, a bullet from a trash can. I think it's in page 4 of your report dated October 21st, 2014.
SM62, you said?
Yes.
Yes.
You testified that you were able to find a DNA sample from that bullet?
Yes, it was a complete profile consistent with Nicholas Leonard.
Okay, so it was Nicholas Leonard's DNA definitely on that projectile, correct?
The two profiles matched.
Thank you, ma'am. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Just briefly on that point, ma'am. Just because there is DNA on a particular item, well, let me kind of move back. Can DNA be transferred from one item to the next? For example, if you had an item that had blood on it, okay, blood DNA, and you put it next to another item, could DNA transfer from one item to the other?
Blood could get on multiple items.
Okay. If you were to take those two items and place them in a bag and close it up and shake the bag around, could that affect the transfer of DNA from one item to the next?
Yes, transfer would be possible in that kind of a scenario.
All right. All right. Thank you. No further questions on that.
All right, ma'am, you may step down. Is she remaining under,
No, Judge, she can be released.
all right, any objection from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, ma'am,
All right, thank you.
you are good to go. Thank you very much.
Have a good afternoon.
State, call your next witness.
Justin Opens.
Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Opens, if you can step up to this podium right here. Turn, raise your right hand and be sworn by my clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, please have a seat in the witness stand, speaking in a loud and clear voice for me. State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you speak a little bit closer to the mic?
Good afternoon.
That's perfect. Do you mind introducing yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Justin Okins.
And will you spell your last name for the court reporter?
Okins.
Mr. Okins, where do you live? You live here in Pasco County?
Yes, sir.
And in 2014, where did you live?
At the time, I was staying over off of New York Avenue.
Is that where your mother lived at the time?
That's where she still resides.
Okay. And that's where she lived in 2014, though?
Yes, sir.
And I've got a map here. I'm going to ask you to look at.
Can't sleep back there.
Putting up what has been marked for identification purposes as states 257.
Okay?
And Mr. Okins, would you mind stepping down if it's okay with the judge?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Now, this map that we're looking at, what is this?
This is the west and east side of Old Dixie.
Old Dixie Highway?
Yes.
Is this an area that you're familiar with?
Yes, sir.
And you said you at the time you were staying off of New York Avenue. Is that somewhere in that region?
It'd be like right
Gentlemen,
here.
you're blocking both sides. You just can move that closer and then it'll
Sorry.
spread out a little bit. There you go. Yeah,
Would
there.
you please point out where,
Where's our pointer?
what'd you say?
I said, where's our pointer?
I don't
Lost our
know.
pointer. Okay, go ahead.
Would you mind pointing out where New York Avenue is roughly on that map?
Roughly New York Avenue would probably be around this area right here.
Okay, that's where you were living at the time.
Yes, sir.
Now, on August 28th, 2014, thank you, do you recall about what time you got back to your residence?
Around 10:45, 11 o'clock.
So again, you gotta keep your voice up, it's letting that hear.
10:45, 11 o'clock. I'm
Great,
sorry.
thank you. That's all right. I know, there's too many rules around here.
And when you got home, who were you with?
At the time, she was my girlfriend, Kristen Anderson.
And is she still your girlfriend?
She's actually my fiance now, but.
Congratulations. So once y'all got home, what did y'all decide to do?
We had just come back from a couple-hour drive, so our legs were kind of stiff, and our dogs were waiting for us there. So we decided that once we got back, we would want to take a walk to stretch our legs out a bit and to, get out with the dogs and whatnot. So we decided to walk down New York Avenue and then took a right on Old Dixie and started to proceed down Old Dixie.
Okay, so do you remember about what time you went on the walk?
We started around like 11:15, 11:20 when we left my mom's house.
Okay, and would you mind kind of just showing the jury the path that you took on this map?
So basically, we left her in my mom's house, went down here, took a right, and followed this road basically down to where the blue star is.
Now, that blue star that is on the map, did you place that star there?
Yes, sir.
And the star, why did you put it in that particular location?
I heard a noise that had grabbed my attention. Sounded like a firearm discharging.
And that's as you were walking the dogs that night?
Yes, sir.
And roughly what time was it when you heard that noise?
Like 11:45 to 12 o'clock.
And did it sound like it was a single gunshot or multiple gunshots?
At the time, it was a single shot. At that spot right there was the first time I heard the pop noise. And then we continued walking because it's not really out of the ordinary to hear a sound like that around that area. But then I heard a few more after that, a little, short time afterward, and that's when I decided, after the fourth time I had heard it, I decided that it was time for me and my pregnant girlfriend to turn around and head home.
And what can you tell us about the spacing and the timing between these shots?
From the first sound that I heard, which would be the blue star right here, it was probably approximately somewhere in the range of a minute to 2 minutes. And then I heard two more, which were spaced out maybe 10, 15 seconds. And then a fourth one, probably 20 to 30 seconds after the third sound.
And
Shot.
about how far did you walk before you finally decided to turn around?
It was like right around in this area right here.
Now, the noises that you heard you've described as gunfire. Are you familiar with guns?
Yes, sir.
Have you fired guns throughout your life?
Yes, sir.
Were you a hunter when you were younger?
I was a hunter. Yes, sir.
Are you still a hunter?
I still hunt every year.
And were you ever in the Army?
Yes, sir.
And were you a weapons technician in the Army?
Yes, sir.
So have you had a lot of experience with multiple different types of firearms throughout your life?
Pretty wide range.
Handguns and long rifles or shotguns?
Yes.
And the particular gunshot that you heard, what did it sound like to you?
To me, it sounded like a low caliber handgun.
Low caliber meaning a small caliber
Yeah,
handgun?
between 22 to maybe like a 9mm, somewhere in that range.
Now, you said you got to this point and decided to turn around and you went back to your residence.
Yes, sir.
Did you call 911 at that point?
No, because like I said, that's not really out of the ordinary. I mean, every month, 2 or 3 times a month, right in this area right here, there's a big retention pond, and a guy flies a helicopter over there all the time. You hear gunshots, you know, people out there testing out a firearm they just bought. It is, you know,
Somewhat rural area.
it is a somewhat rural area, especially with all the land out here too, you know.
And I know it's somewhat difficult to isolate the sound of gunfire, but did you get a general idea of where the noise was coming from?
To me, it sounded like 11 o'clock.
And when you say 11 o'clock, will you tell the jury what you mean by that?
My 12 o'clock would be directly in front of me, 11 o'clock would be just to the left of me slightly. So it sounded, from right there, it sounded like it was around in this area right here.
And at any point, did you notify law enforcement about what you heard?
After, I believe it was the next day or the day after, I believe it was the next day though, we had heard on...
Could it have been September 5th?
Possibly, it's
Okay.
been a little while.
3 years, it's been a while.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point, once we had heard that something had happened there, I just wanted to go down and just kind of let you know, hey, I was walking my dogs, you know, that night, you know, and I wanted you guys to know that I did hear what sounded to me to be a low caliber discharge of a firearm.
Thank you. May I have just one moment, Judge?
You may.
You mentioned that you're familiar with multiple types of handguns. Do you have any familiarity with the 380?
Yes, sir.
And is that a small caliber handgun?
Yes, it would be something more than likely carried by somebody trying to conceal very easily because they are small and compact.
Okay. And the noise that you heard, did it seem to be possibly consistent with that of a 380?
It could be consistent with 380, yes, sir.
Thank you. And Your Honor, we have no further questions right now.
All right. Do you want him to stay where he is for the call
Yes,
across?
please.
Okay.
Just for a couple of questions. How you doing, Mr. Organ?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Nice to meet you again. Sir, with regard to this picture, obviously this isn't a typical map because it's 3D and it's taken more from the horizon as opposed to most typical maps are from the top, right?
Yes, sir.
You would agree with me?
Yes, sir.
So the distances do look shorter, don't they?
Definitely. This between here and here would take about 20. It took us about 20 minutes just to walk about that length.
All right.
20, 30 minutes to walk that length.
So this is where you started out at New York Ave?
We started out on New York Avenue right around here,
Okay.
and then we walked down here and walked to right around here where I heard the first sound.
And then you
Michaela,
turned around?
might Be careful, you're blocking the...
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay. Go ahead.
And then when you reached that point, you turned around, right? So you-
Not the Blue Star. We walked a little bit further, and then I heard a few more. And that at that time, because we were around and there wasn't as much blocking the sound,
Right.
it was a little bit more clear. And that's when I decided that that was a little bit too close for comfort for my pregnant girlfriend.
Okay, and the distance from your residence at the time to the address on 7719 Hatteras, would you agree with me that that would have been, what, a mile and a half, 2 miles?
Yeah.
1.5 miles?
About a mile and a half.
Okay.
Mile and a half.
So were you halfway between your home and the Hatteras address?
No, probably a little bit closer. Probably maybe closer to the 2/3 mark.
2/3?
halfway. This is actually a lot shorter of a distance than it looks than compared to this. Like you were saying, it has a downward angle like that, so you're probably seeing that road right there probably lines up to right about there.
So how much of a distance you think from where you were when you heard the gunshots in Hatteras? About 2/3 of a mile?
I would say 600 yards.
Okay.
600 to 800 yards would probably be around the distance. I know that's a big window, but like I said, you know, when it comes to gunfire going off, you have to take an effect, you know, the urban structure of the area. You have trees, you have buildings, you have cars, you know, going down the road that muffled noises, you know, make it a little bit harder to discern where they're exactly coming from, so.
Right. You can go sit down. I have a couple more questions. I don't think I need the map anymore.
You want the pointer back?
Give it to that gentleman.
There you go.
And you estimate what time was it when you heard the shots?
The first shot, I believe it is around 11:45 to 12 o'clock.
Okay, now you remember coming in for a deposition where I asked you some questions under oath, right?
Yes, sir.
And that would have been April 10th of 2017?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just ask for line and page.
Of course. Page 4. Lines 4 through 6. And then 7, 8, it goes on.
I'm sorry, can you just forget us, we were trying to find the page, could you just repeat the page and line?
Page 4. Page 4.
Page 4, line 4 through 6, and then a little further after that.
Right.
Thank you, sorry.
You're welcome. Sir, in response to one of my questions, do you recall telling me that it was around 12:15 when you were walking your dogs? And then I followed up with a question, what time were you walking your dogs again? You answered again 12:15 a.m.?
Yes, sir. After coming back to you on that date, from such a far date, I actually went back after that date and did a little bit better of a timeline and found that it was before 12 o'clock a.m. on that day that I heard the sound. Because I had gone back through my text messages and found out that I had messaged a friend of mine that we were about to walk the dogs around 11 o'clock.
Okay. So today your testimony is that it was between 11:45 and 12 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree with me, and I think you already said something to the effect of it's hard to determine the direction of gunshots when you have structures and trees and wilderness where sound waves bounce off of. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, but I have a little bit more experience than most people too.
I understand. And your experience isn't your experience mostly hearing gunshots outside as opposed to indoors?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
But we have also been trained in urban combat as well.
when you heard these gunshots, you thought they were outdoor, right?
The first one sounded a little bit muffled, but like I said, I was around the corner still.
Right.
So that would take an effect, the fact that I still had trees in front of me. And then once we came around the corner and I heard the second ones, they were a little bit more muffled, but they were more clear because they had a hollow noise to them, so I could actually discern which direction they actually sounded like they were coming from.
But at that point, did you think that that was actually a gunshot in somebody's house?
I wasn't positive about that, like I said. For the most part, it wasn't, to my knowledge, from what I could hear that night, a firecracker, because they have more of a crack. Firearms have more of a pop,
Right.
and that's what I heard that night.
Well, you would agree with me, if you thought that that was an indoor gunshot, you would have definitely called 911, or am I mistaken?
No, you're not mistaken. I would have called 911 if I had known somebody was firing a weapon inside of a building.
All right, so your impression was that this was an outdoor shot or shots?
Like I said, it wasn't until the third or fourth shot that I decided that I wanted to turn around, because I at that point realized that it was more than likely a firearm instead of firecrackers. And with the spacing between them, it seemed like somebody was thinking more about trigger squeezes than how to fire a new weapon.
Now, you would agree with me, it's hard to gauge not only the direction of a gunshot you hear, but the distance, right?
Yes, sir, especially with such a low caliber weapon.
Right. And I think you testified on direct, but it's, gunshots are common in this area, right?
They're not uncommon.
There's a lot of wilderness, a lot of people with hunting rifles, and a lot of people go out in the woods and shoot off their guns, right?
I've heard quite a few people testing firearms in the woods off of Old Dixie in New York quite a few times. So that's why I didn't call 911.
Okay. And you said about 600 yards was your distance you estimate from the house, right?
That's just an estimate. But yes.
Just one moment, sir. Thank you, sir.
Hold on one second. State any redirect?
Yes, Judge, just 1 second. Mr. Okins, you testified that it's not uncommon to hear gunshots in that general vicinity. What about at that time of night? Was that part unusual?
Kinda. But like I said, it's not very uncommon. So until I realized that something bad had actually happened, it really didn't strike interest in me. The only thing that I was worried about at the time was that didn't sound like fireworks going off. So I want to get home with my pregnant girlfriend.
And do you remember what let you know that something bad had happened?
I believe I saw a bunch of cop cars and stuff going down New York within the next day or two. And I wanted to see what had gone on because after I saw all the police officers and stuff like that, it kind of struck, the memory of hearing the noises. Like maybe that wasn't something that was just uncommon. Somebody testing a firearm, maybe it was something else.
Stood out in your mind enough that you felt after seeing the police cars you needed to report it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Judge, we have no other questions.
All right, sure, you may step down. Thank you very much. State, is he released from his subpoena? You want him to remain under subpoena, State? Give me a second.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. May I have just one moment?
Yeah.
Yes, Judge, he can be released.
Okay, sir, you're released. Defense, any objection?
No, no.
All right, you're released. Thank you very much. State, call your next witness.
Next witness is Kristen Anderson. Judge, we're going to use the same display again. Would you like her to be seated or just have her stay up here the whole time?
No, she needs to be seated to
Okay.
begin with. Ms. Anderson, if you want to step up to the podium. You can stop right there. Raise your right hand and be sworn on my part.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. All right, please have a seat in the witness stand and speak in a loud and clear voice.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Would you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name's Kristen Anderson.
And would you spell your first name for the court reporter?
It's Kristen.
And I think there's only one way to spell Anderson, so we won't get you to spell that one. Where do you live? What county?
Pasco right now.
And in 2014, where did you live?
Hillsborough.
Hillsborough County?
Yes.
Let's go back to a very, very specific day. August 28th, 2014. Do you recall where you were that evening?
That evening we were taking the dogs out for a walk, or was the 28th?
Yes, 28th.
Yeah. That evening we were at 7330 New York.
And what is that residence?
Justin's mom's residency.
And that's, you said, on New York Avenue?
Yes.
And would you mind stepping down and coming to this map? And again, for the record, this map is 257 for ID. Would you kind of point out the general vicinity of where her residence is, where you are staying that night? And what is your relationship?
Ms. Anderson, this court reporter right here has to take down what you say. You're fine where you are, you just got to keep your voice up. You're not just talking to him, you're talking to the whole room. The whole room.
Yeah, it's in like that vicinity right there.
And that residence is at Justin Oakens' mother's residence?
Yes.
And what is your relationship with Justin Oakens?
He's my fiance.
Okay. And in two,
Fiance.
Thank you.
let's move it down this way so you're a little closer to the microphone. Can you all still see down there? Are we blocking your view? Okay. The microphone's right here, so if you kind of just, it should pick you up. Justin Oakens is your fiance?
Yes.
And on this particular evening, when y'all got to that residence, did y'all decide to go for a walk?
Yes, we took the dogs out.
And do you remember approximately what time that was?
It was between 10 and midnight.
And what path did you take? Would you mind showing us on the map?
We walked down New York and then just headed down towards Old Dixie and then around the bend.
Now, there's a blue star on that map.
Yes.
Is there anything significant about the placement of that star?
That's around when we first started hearing the gunshots.
And what can you tell us about the gunshots? Roughly how many did you hear?
Between 3 to 5.
And what do you recall about the spacing of the gunshots?
I recall that there was one and then there were a couple more.
Do you recall how long the break was between one and then the couple more that you mentioned?
It was pretty brief.
Okay. And the couple more that you heard, do you recall what the spacing between those was?
It was fairly rapid.
Okay. Now, do you remember if Justin said anything at that point?
I know after the first one, he was kind of like, "Do you hear that?" And I was like, "Nah." I was like, "I heard something." And he said it was a gunshot. And I was like, "Oh yes, what?" Like it. I realized that it actually was one, and then we heard the couple more, and it reaffirmed. I was like, "Oh yeah, those were gunshots."
Now, are you familiar with guns?
Yes.
Have you been around guns most of your life?
Yes.
Where did you grow up?
Odessa.
Okay. And you've heard gunfire numerous times?
Yes.
And it sounded like gunfire to you?
Yes.
Do you have enough familiarity with firearms to give any description of what type of caliber firearm it sounded like?
That I don't.
Okay. So what did you do after you heard the noises? How far down the road did you continue?
We continued on down to about that drive there, and then we turned around and went on back.
Turned around and went home?
Yes.
And did you call 911 that night?
No.
What's the reason for not calling 911?
It's Pasco. A lot of it out there is rural. People tend to take care of their farms and stuff. And
did you eventually notify law enforcement about what y'all heard?
yes, when we saw on the news that something had happened down Old Dixie, then we contacted law enforcement.
And was that around September 5th?
Yes.
And this map that we're looking at, is this a map of the Old Dixie Highway area, each side of the road?
Yeah.
And are you familiar with this area?
Yes.
And is this to be a true and accurate representation of the area?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time we would like to introduce States 257 into evidence of States 257.
Any objection?
No, no.
Right, 257 will come in as 257.
And we have no further questions. Yeah, we should.
Do you want her to have
I
a
don't need
seat?
the map. If she could have a seat, just have all the questions. Good evening, ma'am. And what time did you testify you heard the gunshots?
It was, I believe it was around 10 to midnight, but
10 to
I know
midnight?
it was late.
All right, and you recall testifying at a deposition you were summoned to and answer some of my questions on April 10th of 2017?
Yes.
And you're sworn under oath at that deposition, right? For court and counsel, I'm on page 5 of that deposition.
Mine?
Line 5 to 6, and maybe even further.
All right, give us a state of the moment.
Stay ready.
Ready.
Hey, ma'am, in that deposition, you said, quote, "It was between midnight and 2 in the morning." Isn't that right?
I may have said that, yes.
Okay. And isn't it true that at first you never heard the shots?
At first, I didn't recall that they were gunfire. I had heard something.
You heard a noise,
Yes,
and then your boyfriend told you he thought it was gunfire, right?
yes. And then that's when I recognized it as some.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Hold on 1 second, ma'am. State any redirect?
Just one moment. Yes, Judge, just briefly. Ms. Anderson, do you recall speaking with law enforcement on September 5th, 2014?
Yes.
Do you recall telling them on that day that your memory of it was between 11:45 p.m. and 12 a.m.?
Yes.
Thank you. We have no other questions.
All right, Ms. Anderson, you may step down. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
State, is she released from her subpoena?
She is.
All right, ma'am, you're free to go. Defense, any objections? No? Okay.
Just to refresh?
Yes? We've come to a point where we're going to break for the evening. The next witness is probably going to be over an hour to an hour and a half long, and I promised 6, and so we're going to leave early. Early is better than late, as far as I'm concerned. Go ahead and have you put your stuff away for the night. Remind you, no texting, tweeting, or blogging. We're still moving along. We're probably actually even ahead of schedule, although it doesn't feel that way. I'm sure to you. But we're moving along. Leaving up an hour early today is not going to affect our timing. And matter of fact, we're still probably a day ahead of right now. So at this time, I'll release you for the evening. Downstairs tomorrow morning at 9:30. Remember, Friday we have off. So tomorrow we will go until 6, but you won't be here on Friday. So we will see you in the morning at 9:30. You'll have a nice evening. Okay? Thank you. All right. Anything we need to address before we adjourn for the day?
Yes, Your Honor, if you could address one item.
Okay.
With Anna Cox's testimony, she
Is
is,
she the next witness?
she is, Judge.
Okay.
She's provided us a 19-slide PowerPoint presentation that kind of aids in her explanation of what the analysis goes through. We discovered that to the defense, and I've asked that we be able to use that as part of her direct testimony. I have printed out the 19 slides so that it can, although it would not go into evidence, I would just want to submit it as part of the record because she is going to be referencing it. I don't know if you have an objection or not as it relates to our use of that.
We have no just for that, Your Honor.
Let me make sure I'm clear. She is going to use a PowerPoint program that you're going to put in, and then she's going to click through, right?
Yes, Judge.
And what you have in your hand is a copy of each of the slides of the PowerPoint.
Yes, Judge.
Is the CD that has the PowerPoint going in as evidence?
No, Judge. It's not
Okay.
going in as evidence. I'm
So-
not planning to admit this as evidence.
So why would you need to have that in the record?
I just didn't know if the record should, if it doesn't, I'm fine with that. I don't know if
She's
the
going to
defense wants.
testify to it. Just because she puts it up there and talks about it, it's been no difference than us showing the phone records yesterday. So at this point,
Okay.
there's no reason to put it into evidence. Her testimony will be taken down by the court reporter as she testifies. And the reason I say that is I always worry that the jury's going to think it's evidence, and then there's something in the record that doesn't really match up with evidence. So at this point, I have no problem. The defense knows what the PowerPoint's going to be, and she can just testify as a normal person would.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Not from the state, Judge.
Defense?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Matos, you've been here throughout. Everything going okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your lawyers are handling things as you've asked them to do. I've seen you communicating with them, writing notes, doing all that kind of thing, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, then we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9:30, okay?
Thank you.
We'll be at recess.